Last night I ended up passing out on the motel couch. I woke up maybe an hour ago with a dry throat, a sharp headache, and feeling nauseous. Which actually wasn't so bad because at least it managed to draw focus away from everything else. My immediate instinct was to head for the shower, but then I stopped before entering the bathroom. I began arguing with myself in my head. What could really happen? The moment I turned the water on, she'd be right there behind me? It wasn't possible. But then again, none of this should have been possible. I decided to text Detective Brito about it. I'm not sure how I was expecting him to respond or whether he was going to take it serious. But he told me that he was heading over, to just stay put and absolutely do not enter the shower. While waiting around for him, I started wondering about the logistics of it all. I'd never entered my room, and the woman had never got to me. So what if I just never took a shower? Would I be alright? At the very least, I should have been okay to use the sink. I splashed my face with cold water until the grogginess had become something manageable. Then I made myself some instant coffee and stared out the window. Tried to dissociate. Detective Brito showed up a few minutes later. There were 3 others with him. One was a middle-aged man wearing a polo shirt and slacks. The other 2 were hulking SWAT officers outfitted in what looked like full sets of gear. The officer stood quietly by the door while the man in the polo shirt flashed an FBI badge, introducing himself as Stevens. His expression was hard to read. He was smiling, but for what reason I couldn't tell. It certainly wasn't friendly, but it also didn't seem malicious. Detective Brito asked me if I had taken a shower yet, and I told him I hadn't. He nodded. Stevens then asked if he could take a look at both emails. I said sure, and then gave him my phone. His expression stiffened for the 5 or so minutes he spent looking them over. But as he handed the phone back to me, the smile had returned. He said it was very important that I cooperate with what he was about to tell me next. I was going to take a shower while they monitored me. I'd shut the curtains, but they'd be there in the room with me. This was probably the only situation where I would have ever agreed to something like that, even though I wasn't fully convinced that anything would happen. They told me that there shouldn't have been anything to worry about since they still had a visual of the woman in my apartment. Apparently, she still hadn't moved. But it was pretty clear that neither of them were really entertaining the possibility of her teleporting over. The prevailing theory was still that the woman had somehow found a way to enter my apartment without me noticing. How she did it, I couldn't possibly begin to fathom. But I suppose that in the absence of any other explanations, it had to be true. So I asked them what reason they had to want to monitor me. What were they expecting? They told me that they weren't entirely sure. But the situation was bizarre enough that it had forced the need to confirm certain truths, to test some theories. Suddenly, there came this gnawing feeling that it wasn't worth the risk. After all, I could just take a bath. But was I only going to take baths from now on? What was I actually afraid of? The woman was still in my apartment. I had armed SWAT guarding me. The fuck could possibly happen? There was no way in hell I was going to live paranoid, looking over my shoulder for the rest of my life. I needed to confirm something as well. That I wasn't in danger. That I had nothing to fear. The plan was to have one of the officers stand out in the hallway by the front door while the other stationed himself right outside the bathroom. Brito and Stevens both turned away as I stripped down, then entered the shower. Doing so felt ridiculous enough that it managed to inject a bit of levity to the mood. But then I turned the water on and that disappeared almost instantly, replaced by dread and uncertainty. It should have felt euphoric to scrub the dirt and sweat off my skin. Instead, my heart was beating heavy as I stared down at the drain. I squeezed some shampoo into my hands and began massaging it into my scalp, though I continued to force my eyes open, keeping them on the drain. But soon the stinging became too much and I closed them for just a few seconds as I wiped the shampoo away. When I opened them back up, it looked like the water had taken a brownish-green color. At first, I thought it could have been the shampoo, but then I could smell something rotten floating through the steam. Suddenly, the spray plate from the showerhead dropped to the floor in front of me. The stench intensified. It took me a few minutes too long to realize what was happening. I turned the water off and opened the curtains, but before I could step out, I could feel something grab my hair. I tried yanking my head away, but whatever was holding me had some kind of iron grip. I couldn't move. Both Brito and Stevens seemed frozen in place as they stared somewhere above me. Their eyes were wide and their mouths were slack. They looked shell-shocked. I asked them to tell me what they were looking at, because I sure as hell didn't want to turn around to find out for myself. But they didn't tell me anything. Instead, they yelled for the officer outside. The bathroom door swung open, but the officer stopped himself before entering. Though his mask was concealing his expression, his body language was telling enough. He shook his head, backed away, then he ran out of the room. I could feel whatever was holding my hair beginning to pull me up, as if it were trying to rip my scalp off. Brito and Stevens continued to stand there, looking dumbfounded. I started to scream, but then the other officer who had helped out in the hallway rushed in. He also stopped at the doorway, hesitating for a moment, before grabbing the knife from his belt and lunging towards me. Soon I could feel the pain and pressure alleviate, and the second I did, I leapt out of the tub. Once I was out the bathroom, I turned around to see a pale arm retracting back into the shower head. It's been a few hours since that happened. A chunk of my hair's missing from where the officer had cut it off. My scalp's been bandaged up, and I ended up using the sink to scrub away whatever sewer water was left on my skin. Mentally, I haven't begun to recover at all. I'm back at the police station now. I can feel everybody staring at me, though they all turn away whenever I try to look at them. A strange tension hangs in the air. Still no updates on Jackson. He may as well be out of the country by now, but they did give me an update on Elisa. They can't find her. She hasn't been into work. Nobody's seen her. I know it's my fault. I could have warned her, but would she have believed me? Would it have been too late anyways? How the fuck could I have seen this coming? I was just so distracted. I've also learned that the woman is no longer in my apartment. From what I've heard, she disappeared right in front of the cops who had been watching her. They just blinked and she was gone. They think she's still in the motel. Somewhere in the pipes. I've deleted all my emails, every single address. The cops insisted I do so, and I didn't fight them on it. But then I received a text message from a number I didn't recognize. I should have paid more attention, been more careful. I shouldn't have opened it, but I did.
The next time you fall asleep, she will be standing over you. She will take you. No escape. No escape. No escape.
Every passing second kind of feels like a slow march towards doom. I've been talking to a lot of psychiatrists who try and calm me down, lead me away from bad thoughts. It's clear that they're choosing their words carefully, but that they still can't figure out exactly what to say to me. I've asked for some coffee, but that request was shut down. Caffeine right now would lead to an earlier crash, they tell me, and they needed me to stay awake for as long as possible as they tried to figure something out. So now, I'm sitting in an interrogation room while a couple of detectives watch me, make sure I don't doze off. They've given me some food that's supposedly good for staving away drowsiness. Oatmeal, eggs, mixed nuts, and some fruit, with a lot of water. I still feel pretty alert, but the day's really only started. The longest I've ever gone without sleep was about 28 hours. I'm not sure how long I can push that to. Every now and then, they'll give me an update about what's going on. They sent a drone into the motel washroom, flying it up near the open shower head. The feed showed that the woman was still in there. Well, all they could see was her head. It was just crammed inside, features compressed to fit into the tight space. Still nothing about Jackson or Elisa. But now they're telling me that they've found somebody who might know what to do. A specialist, they're calling him. He's already on his way over. They've framed this as good news, though it's hard to get my hopes up these days. I'll update once I find out what's going on with this. So the specialist arrived a few hours ago. His name is Luke. He used to be a computer science professor. Now he holds some vague position at DARPA. He tried explaining to me exactly what he does, but most of it kind of went into one ear and out the other. But I managed to retain the important parts. Ever since grad school, he's been doing some deep digging into an incredibly obscure topic. Viruses. But not the biological kind. Not malware either. He says that over the years, he's noticed eerie parallels between how viruses manage to proliferate themselves through any given system and the mechanisms behind real-world phenomena. Social influence, mass hysteria, dictatorships, genocide, war. The very concept of fear. I asked him if he was implying that the world was a simulation, that our existence was the product of some kind of extra-dimensional coding. He told me that in a very broad sense. Yes. But that he doesn't claim to understand the layers involved. That he's not sure we're capable of understanding them at all. Of course, this was the kind of research that most respected institutions wouldn't touch with a 1,000-foot pole. So the vast majority of it was done independently, funded through his own 401k and line of credit. The only platform that had ever been available for him to publish his findings was his own website. And for decades, they just sat there, collecting digital dust. The few reactions they did get were nothing more than derision from fellow academics. He was mocked, chastised. But these things didn't do much to deter him. He just kept doing his research, kept publishing whatever he'd found. Then one day he arrived at a breakthrough. He found something definitive to focus on. The paranormal. Not just haunted houses or strange creatures in the woods, but things that can't be explained by the rules that we've set in place. The things that break our understanding of the world. I asked him to give me an example. He told me about the cabin in the woods, not an actual physical cabin. It was more akin to a predatory entity, a trap that would only present itself to those desperate enough to take the bait. He went on to say how it's not an uncommon thing for people to get lost in the woods. Hikers, backpackers, those running away from something. The woods are vast, foreboding, hiding a bunch of secrets. He told me to imagine that I'd been lost for days, thirsty, starving, hopeless, delirious enough that I don't question why somebody would build a cabin so far out in the middle of nowhere. Why it looks so new and maintained. I'd stumble up to it and knock on the door, but nobody answers. Then I try the handle and find it unlocked, and I go inside. There's running water, fresh food in the fridge, but nobody around. Again, I don't question this. I'm just so relieved that the world's finally tossed me a bone. I then go upstairs and find a fresh bed waiting for me. I'm so weak, so tired. My legs desperately need a reprieve. I just need to recharge. A quick nap and I'll have enough energy to keep going. So I crawl into bed. Long later, I wake up in darkness and assume it's nighttime. But there's something wrong, because my eyes aren't adjusting to it. Then I realize it's because the darkness is absolute. There's no moonlight streaming in from the windows. I get out of bed and try maneuvering around the room. The air feels thick, damp. There's a heavy scent of earth and metal all around. Eventually I find the light switch, but it's not working. So I take out my crumpled box of matches and use them to navigate downstairs and out the front door. And then I realize that I'm no longer in a forest. The grassy floor has been replaced by rough stone. I see nothing but darkness in all directions. There's a dripping noise coming from some undefined distance away. I'm in a cave. How I got here, I can't begin to comprehend. I panic and start running. But I have no light and nowhere to go. Only a few matches left. I decide to go back into the cabin while I come up with another plan. It'll be safer there. Once inside, I light another match, just to get a sense of the layout. But it illuminates more than I'd anticipated. Something I hadn't noticed before. People, standing all around me in the dark. Not moving. Not speaking. Just watching. They look normal enough, but the context makes their presence frightening. Then one of them starts moving towards me. The cabin is a virus, something that doesn't belong in our reality. A corrupted space that we have no answers for. Nobody knows who or what put it here, how it even works, just that it was meant to disturb the order of things. To slowly break us down. It'd be fair to call it evil in nature. The woman was a virus as well. Our reality was the system she'd infected. Like malware, she spreads digitally. But unlike malware, she's unrestricted. Sentient beyond our understanding of the word. She has more control over our own reality than we do. That's why the cops couldn't move her. We are bound by the rules of the universe. She breaks them. I had to ask Luke to leave me alone for a while. It was just too much to hear at once. Too much to take in. But I already feel the fatigue coming on. I hadn't been sleeping well even before all this. We were pressed for time. If he had a solution, then I needed to hear it now. I called him back in and asked him if he had a plan. He told me that he did. So then I asked how much confidence he had in it. He said he was more confident than not. That on a scale from 1 to 10, he was feeling about a 6. It wasn't really what I wanted to hear, and I guess he could sense as much because he told me that he was just trying to be as honest as possible. I took a deep breath and told him to go ahead and tell me what he had in mind. He asked me if I was familiar with honeypots in a cybersecurity context. I told him I might have read an article about it once, but that he should probably fill in the blanks for me. He told me that in the simplest of terms, they were traps meant to lure in hackers. Something that seems real, something worth invading. But ultimately nothing but smoke and mirrors, an isolated, heavily monitored system. He asked me to imagine that I was a thief roaming around a neighborhood for somewhere to rob. Then I spot a large, expensive-looking house with all of its lights off. I sneak into the backyard and find the back door unlocked. And then I enter. But I've been baited. There's nothing to steal in there, and all of the doors suddenly lock from the outside. I've now been trapped. I told him that I wasn't really following. He looked at the floor for a moment before saying that the cabin itself was the honeypot. The woman was likely meticulously designed to infect our reality. In other words, she can only operate within the parameters that our world is bound by. The cabin is not bound by such rules. It's as much of an aberration as herself. And what happens when two aberrations are forced to interact? He said he couldn't be entirely sure, though he could make some reasonable assumptions. The most important one being that they would interfere with each other. What kind of interference that would be remained to be seen. Best case scenario, they would just completely shut each other down. He didn't talk about the worst case. Then he said he had to retract an earlier statement. The cabin wasn't exactly a honeypot, not based on the strict definition of the word, because we didn't actually need to lure the woman in there. We had the means to simply make her appear. And now I understood where he was going with this. The plan was for us to travel to the cabin. We'd go inside, and then I'd fall asleep. The woman would spawn in, but she wouldn't be able to operate in there, wouldn't be able to leave either. Then they'd wake me up, and we'd go back to the surface while she remained trapped there forever. No more emails, no more phone calls. The nightmare would be over. At least, that's how Luke was trying to sell it to me. And I really wanted to believe him. I asked him how we were supposed to get to the cabin if it only appears to those who've been lost in the woods for days. He said that we didn't need to hunt it down, because years ago somebody had managed to escape the place, navigating the dark caves for nearly 2 whole days before he made it back to the surface. They found him miles away from a public campsite, in a state comparable to catatonia. Breathing but unresponsive, his expression fixed in a 1,000-yard stare. But over time, he was able to come back to reality. Within a few weeks, he was completely coherent again. and he was able to give a shockingly accurate account of where exactly the cabin was. Not just the location of the cave, but exactly how you needed to navigate inside in order to get there, which he told me shouldn't have been possible, because the guy claimed to have been in pitch darkness the entire time. They had no answer for this, but it didn't really matter. I asked him how far down into the cave we'd need to go. He told me not far, just over 200 feet in vertical depth. I just nodded. I'd never been in a cave, and I'd never really been interested. He then asked me how I was feeling. I answered honestly, that the drowsiness had just started to settle in. I checked the time, seeing that I'd been awake for just over 15 hours at that point. He said that we better get going then, because it was going to take us at least 4 hours to get to the cave, and about another 3 to traverse all the way down to the cabin. I asked him what we were going to do if the plan failed, if his theories proved wrong. He just smiled, told me that we'd figure something else out, but he wouldn't elaborate any further. I excused myself and went to the bathroom. I spent a long time in there just pacing around, intermittently splashing my face with water. I knew it was time wasted, but there were just too many thoughts popping up at once. It was hard to deal with. I was panicking. And then came the nausea. As I was dry heaving into one of the toilets, I could feel my phone vibrating in my pocket. I took it out. It was Jackson, calling me.